If you had asked me 3 months ago to describe my life, the word I would have used is settled. Not in a boring way, like dust settling on forgotten furniture, but in the way a foundation settles, becoming stronger, more permanent, and utterly reliable. My life with Mark was a well-built house. We had spent 12 years laying the groundwork, framing the walls, and choosing the perfect, comfortable furnishings. We had our morning routines, etched into the fabric of our days with the comfortable precision of a beloved recording. He'd be up at 6, the scent of dark roast coffee his first "I love you" of the day. I'd drift awake as he showered, the sound of the water a gentle alarm clock. By the time I made it to the kitchen, a mug would be waiting for me on the granite countertop, always with a splash of oat milk, just how I liked it. We were that couple, the ones our friends pointed to as proof that it could work, that you could still be in love after a decade plus of shared bills and dental appointments. We still held hands in the grocery store. He still left notes on the bathroom mirror in the steam from his shower. We had our shows we'd binge, our favorite takeout orders memorized, our inside jokes that were so old they felt like a secret language. We'd built an entire world that was just for us, a fortress of mutual respect and affection against the chaos outside. He was a partner in the truest sense of the word. When I'd had a terrible week at the design firm, he'd be the one to draw me a bath and order Thai food without me even having to ask. When his father got sick, I was the one who managed the hospital visits, the doctor's calls, the endless stream of concerned relatives, so he could just focus on being a son. We were a team, unshakable. That's why, when he first mentioned the business trip to Denver, it was nothing more than a minor blip on the radar, a logistical detail in our shared calendar. It was a Tuesday night. We were on the couch, side by side, the comfortable silence punctuated by the low murmur of some crime documentary on the television. I was scrolling through my phone, half looking at kitchen renovation ideas, when he casually tossed the pebble that would eventually cause the avalanche. "Hey, honey," he said, nudging my foot with his. "Just got the final confirmation today. I'll have to be in Denver for that quarterly leadership summit. It's next Thursday through Sunday." I looked up from my phone, a small frown of disappointment creasing my brow. "Oh, really? This weekend? I thought it was still up in the air." "Yeah, they just locked it in," he said, his eyes still on the TV. "It's a bit of a pain, I know, but head office is flying everyone in. It's a big deal. The whole senior management team will be there." It all sounded so plausible, so Mark. His career in financial consulting was demanding, filled with these acronym-laden summits and mandatory networking events. Denver made sense. His company had a huge Western regional office there. A leadership summit on a long weekend was standard practice. There wasn't a single detail that felt out of place. My disappointment was purely selfish. I had been looking forward to a quiet weekend, maybe a trip to the farmer's market, a lazy Sunday afternoon spent gardening. "Well, that's a bummer for us, but it sounds important," I said, tucking my feet under his leg. "We'll just have to postpone our lazy weekend." "Exactly," he said, finally turning to look at me, his face a mask of apologetic sincerity. "I'm really sorry, babe. I'd much rather be here with you, you know that." He leaned in and kissed my forehead, a gesture so familiar and comforting that it physically erased any lingering disappointment. It was his signature move, the one that could calm my anxiety or end a stupid argument in an instant. "I know you would," I said, smiling. "We'll make up for it when you get back. Will you have any downtime at all? Or is it going to be wall-to-wall meetings?" This was the moment. Looking back, this was the first hairline crack in the foundation. It was so small, so insignificant, that I didn't even register it as a crack at the time. It was just a pause. A brief hesitation that lasted a fraction of a second too long. He blinked. No, it's pretty packed," he said, his voice a little too bright, a little too polished. "You know how these things are. Breakfast meetings, breakout sessions, team-building dinners. It's a marathon. I'll probably just crash at the hotel as soon as I get a free minute." He then launched into a detailed, almost rehearsed-sounding itinerary. He mentioned the keynote speaker, a big name in their industry. He talked about a specific workshop on market futures he was supposedly looking forward to. He even named the hotel they were all allegedly staying at. A sleek, corporate-looking place downtown I'd seen in travel magazines. It was a deluge of information, a flood of perfectly reasonable details. At the time, I interpreted it as him trying to include me, to make me feel part of his work life. He was being transparent, sharing the boring minutiae of his trip. But there was something in his delivery, an over-eagerness. It was like a student who had over-prepared for an oral report, reciting memorized facts instead of speaking naturally. I remember a tiny, fleeting thought crossed my mind. He sounds like he's selling me something. I dismissed it almost immediately. I told myself he was just stressed about the summit. He was a perfectionist, a high achiever. Of course, he'd have all the details memorized. He was probably just running through it in his own head. I was being paranoid, reading into a simple conversation because I was bummed about our weekend plans being canceled. "Wow, sounds intense," I said, forcing a supportive smile. "Well, you'd better pack warm. Denver in the fall can be tricky." "Way ahead of you," he said, squeezing my foot. He turned his attention back to the TV, and just like that, the moment passed. The conversation shifted back to our normal, comfortable rhythm. We debated the guilt of the documentary's main suspect. We talked about what to have for dinner the next day, and we went to bed at our usual time. He kissed me goodnight, his lips warm and familiar, and whispered, "I love you." I said it back without a second thought because it was the truest thing in my world. Our world. The perfect, settled, well-built house where I felt completely and utterly safe. The house I didn't yet know was built on a sinkhole. The next couple of days were a study in domestic normalcy, but a thread of tension, invisible and taut, ran through it all. On the surface, everything was as it should be. We discussed our days, cooked dinner together, and fell into the familiar patterns of our shared life. But that strange, overly rehearsed quality I had noticed in Mark's voice when he described the trip lingered in the back of my mind. It was like hearing a faint, discordant note in a beautiful piece of music. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous, that I was manufacturing drama where there was none. Mark was a good man, my man. Our foundation was solid. And yet, I found myself watching him, searching for something I couldn't name. The night before he was scheduled to leave, he pulled his black roller suitcase from the top of the closet and laid it open on our bed. Packing was a familiar ritual for us. He'd lay out his suits and shirts, and I'd be the one to handle the details, making sure his ties matched, rolling his socks and t-shirts to save space, and gathering his toiletries. It was part of our teamwork, a small act of service that said, "I'm with you, even when you're away." This time, however, something was different. He seemed proprietary over the task. When I reached for the stack of ironed shirts I'd prepared for him, he intercepted me with a tight smile. "It's okay, honey. I've got it. Don't want you to have to worry about all this." He folded the shirts himself, his movements precise and a little stiff. It was a small thing, a tiny deviation from our routine, but it felt like a locked door. He'd never minded my help before. In fact, he'd always said he was grateful for it. Tonight, he seemed to want to keep me at a distance from the contents of his luggage. My budding suspicion felt foolish in the warm, ambient light of our bedroom. This was Mark, the man who knew my coffee order and the name of my childhood dog. I was letting a 2-second pause and a weird tone of voice turn me into some kind of paranoid hysteric. Resolved to push the feeling away, I went about my part of the ritual. "Don't forget your toiletries," I said, heading towards the master bathroom. "I'll just grab your travel toothpaste and put it in the bag." "Already got it," he called out from the bedroom, his voice strained. "Another locked door. Okay. Well, is there anything else you need from in here? Razor? Contact solution?" I was standing in the bathroom doorway, watching him. He was bent over his DOP kit on the bed, zipping it open and closed, seeming to check and recheck its contents. "Nope, all set. I'm good." He zipped it up for the final time and tucked it neatly into a corner of the suitcase. He turned and gave me that same tight smile again. It didn't reach his eyes. Determined to be the supportive wife, I walked over to the bed. "All right, Mr. Self-Sufficient. Let me just do a final check." I said it playfully, trying to inject some of our usual humor back into the moment. Before he could object, I started doing a quick visual sweep of the items laid out on the duvet. A dark navy suit, a charcoal gray one, several crisp white and blue dress shirts, a pair of jeans for the plane ride, a cashmere sweater in case it got cold. Everything was exactly what a man would pack for a corporate leadership summit in Denver. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, followed by a hot flush of shame for ever doubting him. I was being crazy, and then I saw it. Tucked partially under the folded sweater was a small, sleek, white bottle. It wasn't a brand I recognized from our medicine cabinet. The label was minimalist and expensive-looking, with clean, sans serif font. I reached out and picked it up. It was a bottle of sunscreen. Not just any sunscreen, but a high-end, SPF 50, broad-spectrum, reef-safe sunblock. It was brand new, the safety seal still gleaming under the lamplight. I held it in my hand, felt impossibly heavy, a dead weight of confusion. "What's this for?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Mark's head snapped towards me. His eyes darted from my face to the bottle in my hand and back again. For a split second, I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated panic in his eyes. It was there and then it was gone, replaced by a forced, casual expression. "Oh, that," he said, letting out a little laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Forgot about that. The hotel has this amazing indoor-outdoor heated pool with a glass roof. A sun deck. Thought if I got a lunch break or something, I might try to catch a few rays." He took the bottle from my hand and tossed it into his suitcase. "You know what they say about the sun at high altitude? It's brutal even in the fall." His words hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. The high-altitude sun, an indoor-outdoor pool, a lunch break. It was a plausible explanation. A perfectly logical, reasonable explanation that contradicted everything he had told me just 2 nights before. Wall-to-wall meetings. It's a marathon. I'll probably just crash at the hotel as soon as I get a free minute. The two narratives clashed violently in my mind. One of them had to be a lie. I didn't challenge him. I didn't have the courage. Some primal, self-preservation instinct told me that to pull at this thread was to risk unraveling everything. So I just nodded, a slow, dumb movement of my head. "Oh, right. Smart." He seemed to sense the shift in me, the sudden chill in the room. "Hey," he said, stepping closer and putting his hands on my shoulders. "It's just a stupid business trip. I'll be home before you know it, and we can have our lazy weekend then. I promise." He leaned in to kiss me, but I instinctively turned my head slightly, and his lips landed on my cheek instead of my mouth. If he noticed, he didn't say anything. He finished packing in silence, and the rest of the night passed in a haze of strained pleasantries. The next morning, his alarm went off at the ungodly hour of 4:30 a.m. for his flight. He dressed in the dark, a shadow moving through our room. The goodbye at the door was brief. He was holding his suitcase, the one containing the dress shirts and the cashmere sweater and the lie in the little white bottle. "I'll text you when I land," he said, giving me a quick, dry kiss. "Okay, be safe," I replied, my voice a hollow echo of the hundreds of other times I'd said those words. I watched from the front window as his Uber pulled away from the curb, its red taillights disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. I stood there for a long time after the car was gone, a cold dread seeping into my bones. The foundation of our house, the one I had believed was so strong and settled, had just given a deep, ominous groan, and I was standing all alone in the middle of it, feeling the floor begin to tilt. The moment the Uber's lights vanished, the silence of the house rushed in to fill the void. It was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered the comfortable hum of our life. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, every gurgle of the refrigerator in the kitchen, sounded amplified and alien. For 12 years, this house had been our sanctuary, a place of shared warmth and laughter. Now, it felt like a museum of a life that may have never been real, and I was the sole, lonely visitor. I stood at the window for what felt like an hour, my husband's phantom kiss still cool on my cheek, replaying the last 48 hours in a torturous loop. The practiced speech about the summit, the flicker of panic in his eyes, the bottle of sunscreen, the flimsy, contradictory excuse. They were no longer isolated incidents. They were beads on a string, forming a necklace of deceit that was now tightening around my throat. I tried to go about my morning. I started the coffee maker, the familiar scent filling the kitchen, but it brought no comfort. I opened my laptop at the kitchen island, intending to get a head start on work, but the words on the screen blurred into meaningless shapes. My mind was a courtroom, and I was both prosecutor and defense attorney. The defense argued for reason and trust. He's stressed. You're reading into things. 12 years of love and partnership don't just evaporate overnight. You're tired and being paranoid. But the prosecution had evidence. It was circumstantial, yes, but it was compelling. It presented the sunscreen, the strange behavior, the look on his face. And the prosecution's case felt stronger with every passing second. At 9:17 a.m., my phone buzzed on the counter. It was Mark, landed safely in Denver, heading to the hotel. Crazy busy day ahead. Love you. I stared at the message, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was so normal, so perfectly, excruciatingly normal. A part of me, a desperate, pleading part, wanted to seize that normality. I wanted to text back, glad you made it. Have a great day. Love you too. And then force myself to believe it. I could delete the suspicion from my mind like a bad file. I could choose to live in the comfortable house, to ignore the groaning foundation beneath my feet. I could decide that the discord I'd heard was just a figment of my imagination. For a few blissful seconds, I almost did. But I couldn't shake the feeling of his lips on my cheek instead of my mouth. I couldn't unsee the panic in his eyes. The lie, whatever it was, had a life of its own now. It was in the house with me, and I knew I wouldn't be able to breathe the same air until I faced it. He had given me a detail, a specific, verifiable piece of information, probably to make his story more believable. The Grand Summit Hotel, downtown. He'd mentioned it by name when he was laying out his fake itinerary. He had handed me a thread, and I had to know where it led, even if it meant unraveling everything. The idea to call the hotel felt like a transgression, a fundamental violation of the trust that had been the bedrock of our marriage. My hands trembled as I sat with my phone. This was the territory of crazy, jealous wives in movies, the ones who sniffed collars and checked phone records. I had never been that woman. I had never felt the need to be. We had privacy and we had trust. To make this call was to admit, in a tangible way, that I no longer trusted my husband. What if I was wrong? What if he was there, and the receptionist put me through to his room? What would I say? Hi, honey. Just calling your hotel room to make sure you're not lying to me? The humiliation would be unbearable. I'd have to confess my paranoia, and it would become a scar on our relationship forever, a testament to my lack of faith. But what if I was right? The need to know was a physical ache, a burning in my gut that was more powerful than the fear of being wrong. I had to do it, but I needed a reason, a plausible cover story. I couldn't just ask if he was a guest. I had to create a scenario. I rehearsed it in my head, my voice a silent whisper in the empty kitchen. Hi, I'm trying to reach my husband, Mark Peterson. He's a guest there for the Omnicorp Leadership Summit. His phone is going straight to voicemail, and I have an urgent question about a document for our mortgage refinance. It sounded believable, mundane, an everyday marital errand. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest as I Googled the Grand Summit Hotel, Denver. The number was right there on the screen. I typed the digits into my phone, my thumb hovering over the green call button. This was it, the point of no return. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and pressed call. The phone rang twice before a woman with a crisp, professional voice answered. Good morning. You've reached the Grand Summit Hotel. This is Brenda speaking. How may I help you? My own voice was shaky, but I forced it into a semblance of normalcy. Hi, Brenda. I'm hoping you can help me. I need to leave an urgent message for my husband, Mark Peterson. He's a guest there, staying with the Omnicorp Leadership Summit. Of course, ma'am, she said politely. I heard the soft, rapid clicking of a keyboard. And that name is Mark Peterson? Yes, Peterson. I spelled out, my throat suddenly dry. The clicking continued for a few seconds that stretched into an eternity. This was the moment. The floor would either stabilize or collapse entirely. I'm sorry, ma'am, Brenda said, her voice still perfectly pleasant. I'm not showing a guest registered under that name. Let me just double-check the group roster for the Omnicorp Summit. More clicking. My grip on the phone tightened, my knuckles turning white. Please be there. Please just be a simple mistake. No, she said finally, a note of finality in her tone. I'm showing the full attendee list for the summit, and there's no Mark Peterson on it. We also don't have a reservation under that name for this weekend at all. Are you sure you have the right hotel? The question hung in the air, a polite inquiry that was simultaneously a wrecking ball to my entire life. Am I sure I have the right hotel? No, I wasn't sure of anything anymore, except for the cold, sickening certainty that was flooding my veins. I clung to one last, desperate strand of hope. Could you possibly check for a Mark Peters? Or maybe Peterson with a D? Sometimes people mix it up. Certainly, Brenda said, patient and professional. Another pause. More clicking. No, ma'am. I have no one under any similar name, either as a solo guest or with the Omnicorp group. I'm very sorry. Okay, I whispered. My voice was a ghost. Thank you for your time. I ended the call without waiting for her reply. I placed the phone gently on the granite countertop, as if any sudden movement might shatter me into a million pieces. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't heavy or menacing anymore. It was empty. It was the silence of a vacuum, the silence of a world that had ended. The groaning foundation hadn't just cracked. It had disintegrated. I was in a freefall, tumbling through the ruins of my marriage, and the ground was nowhere in sight. He wasn't in Denver. He had lied. It wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was the truth. For a long time, I didn't move. I just sat at the kitchen island, my hand resting on the cool, silent phone. The world outside the window continued as if nothing had happened. A neighbor walked his golden retriever. The mail truck made its slow, methodical way down our street. It was all so insultingly normal. My own world had just been reduced to rubble, and the universe hadn't even paused to notice. The feeling of freefall slowly subsided, replaced by an unnerving, icy calm. The shock was so profound, so absolute, that it had short-circuited all the messy emotions. There was no screaming, no crying, just a hollow, ringing clarity. He lied. It was a fact, as solid and indisputable as the granite beneath my elbows. The question was no longer if he was lying, but how big the lie was. My mind, which had felt so foggy and confused just moments before, sharpened to a razor's edge. The grief and the panic were still there, waiting in the wings, but they were drowned out by a new, powerful emotion. The cold, methodical fury of a woman who has been profoundly underestimated. He thought I would just sit here all weekend, watering the plants and missing him, never questioning the flimsy script he'd written. He thought his perfect husband act was foolproof. He had mistaken my love for stupidity. A fire ignited in my chest, a smokeless, heatless flame of pure resolve. I would not be the clueless wife. I would uncover the entire, rotten truth. If he wasn't in Denver, where was he? He was a creature of habit and comfort, but also of meticulous planning. This wasn't an impulsive act. This was a premeditated operation. He would have left a trail. In this day and age, you always leave a trail. And the easiest one to follow is almost always made of money. Our finances. We had a shared checking account for bills, shared savings, and a primary shared credit card for all our daily expenses. We were that transparent with each other, that intertwined. His name was on the account, but so was mine. I had every right to see where our money was going. The guilt I had felt before calling the hotel was completely gone now, incinerated by his betrayal. The old rules were obsolete. I was no longer violating his privacy. I was conducting a damage assessment of my own life. I walked on steady feet to my office, the small room at the back of the house that looked out onto the garden. I sat down in my comfortable leather chair, the one he'd bought me for my birthday 2 years ago, and turned on my desktop computer. The machine whirred to life, its familiar hum a stark contrast to the frantic pounding in my ears. I opened a web browser, my fingers flying across the keyboard with a purpose I hadn't felt all morning. I navigated to the credit card company's website, a page I'd visited hundreds of times to pay our monthly bill. I typed in our username and password without hesitation. The main account page loaded, showing our balance and available credit. It all looked so benign. I took a breath and clicked the link, View Recent and Pending Transactions. The page refreshed, displaying a list of charges, the most recent at the top. I scanned down. A charge from the airport shuttle service he'd used this morning. A charge from my favorite coffee shop yesterday. The grocery bill from Tuesday. It all looked normal, a perfect digital record of the life I thought we were living. I felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe there was a rational explanation. Maybe the hotel had made a mistake. And then I saw it. It was a pending charge from this morning, time-stamped at 8:52 a.m. Eastern Time, which would have been 7:52 a.m. Central. It was for $28.50 from a place called Joe's Coffee in Austin, Texas. Austin, not Denver. The two words blinked on the screen, a digital confirmation of my deepest fears. My breath hitched in my throat. Austin, Texas, a city known for live music, for bachelor parties, for a vibrant, youthful energy. A city that was 1,000 miles away from the corporate, snow-capped landscape of Denver he had so carefully painted for me. The sunscreen, the brand new, expensive, reef-safe sunscreen. There were lakes near Austin, big ones. Suddenly, I was a detective with a lead. I scrolled down the list of transactions with a renewed, frantic energy. I wasn't just looking anymore. I was hunting, and the trail was everywhere. It was like a hidden image that, once seen, could never be unseen. 2 days ago, a charge for $2,100. The merchant was listed as VRBO Vacation Rentals. My heart stopped. I clicked on the transaction details. The notes section contained a property ID number and a location, Lake Travis, TX. He hadn't booked a hotel room for a business conference. He had rented a house, a whole house on a lake for the weekend. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the sides of my desk. The cost alone was staggering, far more than any hotel room would have been. This was an expense meant for a group for a party. The evidence kept coming, an avalanche of digital receipts. A charge from yesterday afternoon at a large grocery store chain in Austin, an HEB. The total was $487.30. I could practically see the shopping cart in my mind. Multiple cases of beer, several bottles of tequila and high-end bourbon, bags of limes, chips, salsa, and enough steak and chicken to feed a small army. This wasn't the room service and sad desk salads diet of a man on a business trip. This was a party, a full-blown, premeditated party weekend. I kept scrolling, my vision blurring with rage. Another charge from last night, the Oasis on Lake Travis. I knew that name. A friend had gone there for a bachelorette party years ago. It was a famous, multi-tiered restaurant and bar complex known for its stunning sunset views over the lake. The charge was for $312. It was a dinner for two at the very least, maybe more. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight. The picture was complete, painted in the stark, undeniable colors of credit card transactions. He was in Austin, Texas. He was in a rented lake house with a fully stocked fridge. He had gone out for a beautiful sunset dinner last night. He had started his morning with artisanal coffee. He was not alone. The sunscreen wasn't for a high-altitude sundeck. It was for a boat, or a dock, for a weekend of fun in the sun with people who were not his colleagues, in a place that was not for business. Every single word he had said to me about this trip was a lie. It wasn't just a simple affair. This was a production, an elaborate, expensive, and meticulously planned deception. And he was using our money to pay for it. Staring at the list of transactions, I felt like an archaeologist who had just unearthed a hidden, cursed city. The evidence was overwhelming, a complete record of a secret life. But it was an impersonal record. Credit card charges and location data told me the what, the where, and the when. They couldn't tell me the most important thing, the question that was now screaming in the hollowed-out chambers of my heart. Who was he with? Who was sitting across from him at that restaurant, watching the sunset over the lake? Who was he buying groceries with, laughing as they picked out a bottle of wine? Who was going to use that bottle of sunscreen? The betrayal, which had at first felt like a singular act against me, now felt like a conspiracy, and the facelessness of my co-conspirator was a special kind of torture. She was a ghost, a phantom, and it was making me feel like I was the one who was unreal. In the old days, a discovery like this would have been the end of the line. I would have had to wait, stewing in my own toxic misery, until he came home and I could confront him. But we don't live in the old days. We live in an age of digital exhibitionism, where people's lives are curated and broadcast for public consumption. We live and breathe social media, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that a weekend this elaborate, this expensive, this planned, was not something that would go undocumented. Someone somewhere was posting about it. My first instinct was to go to Mark's own social media pages. It was a fool's errand, and I knew it. His Instagram was a ghost town of corporate headshots and a single 3-year-old picture of us hiking. His Facebook was equally sterile, a wasteland of shared articles about the stock market and birthday wishes from distant relatives. He was too smart, too meticulous a liar to incriminate himself. He had built a digital firewall around his deception. But his friends were a different story. My anger had given me a strange, methodical clarity. I went back to the list of transactions. The oasis on Lake Travis. It was a location, a specific geotagged place. I opened the Instagram app on my phone, my thumb shaking so badly I had to steady it with my other hand. The search bar felt like a portal to a world I didn't want to enter, but I couldn't stop myself. I typed in the name of the restaurant. A list of options appeared, and I clicked on Places. The app served up a grid of photos and videos, a mosaic of thousands of strangers' happy moments, all tagged at that exact location. I tapped on the Recent tab and began to scroll. It was a sickening, voyeuristic nightmare. I scrolled past smiling couples clinking margarita glasses, families celebrating birthdays, groups of college girls posing against the sunset. Every happy face felt like a personal insult. My eyes scanned each photo, searching for a familiar face, a friend of Mark's, anyone who could be a link in the chain. I scrolled for what felt like hours, my hope beginning to dwindle. It was a needle in a digital haystack. And then I found it. It wasn't a picture of Mark. It was a picture of Jessica, the wife of Mark's college buddy, Dave. The four of us had dinner together maybe once every couple of months. I knew her face as well as I knew my own. In the photo, she was part of a selfie with 2 other women, all of them beaming, their faces glowing in the golden hour light. Behind them, the unmistakable tiered balconies of the oasis dropped away towards the glittering lake. The caption was bubbly and carefree. Austin sunsets with my favorite crew. Couldn't ask for a better start to our guys' weekend getaway. Winking face, a guy's weekend. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. The lie was even more insidious than I had imagined. It wasn't just his lie. It was a group lie. Dave was here, which meant Jessica was here. And if they were both here, then Mark was most certainly here. They had fabricated a guy's weekend to give him cover. Our friends, people who had eaten at our dinner table and complimented my cooking, were complicit in my husband's betrayal. My mind was racing. Who were the other women in the photo with Jessica? I clicked on the tag on her picture. One name was a woman I didn't know. The other name was Chloe Vance. I tapped on the tag, and it took me to her profile. It was public. The profile picture was of a woman in her late 20s, maybe early 30s. She had long, dark hair, big brown eyes, and a smile that was both dazzling and a little bit smug. She was, in a word, beautiful. The kind of effortless, confident beautiful that makes you immediately conscious of your own flaws. I felt a cold, primitive dread creep up my spine. I started scrolling through her feed. It was a perfectly curated highlight reel of a fun, adventurous life. Pictures of her hiking in stylish activewear, drinking cocktails at trendy bars, posing on tropical beaches. There were no pictures of her with a significant other. It was a feed designed to look independent and free-spirited, but I could feel his presence in the negative space. He was the one holding the camera. I scrolled further and further back, weeks turning into months. And then I found it. A picture from about 6 weeks ago, captioned, "Best surprise trip to the coast." It was a photo of her, smiling, on the balcony of a beachfront hotel room. In the reflection of the glass of the sliding door behind her, a figure was visible. It was blurry, distorted by the light, but it was unmistakably a man holding up a phone to take the picture. A man with Mark's broad shoulders, wearing the dark gray t-shirt he loved, and on his wrist, the silver watch I had bought him for our 10th anniversary. My breath left my body in a ragged gasp. I felt like I was going to be sick. It was him. It was real. This had been going on for months. This Chloe Vance was the ghost who had been haunting my marriage. I kept scrolling, my movements frantic now. Who was she? We had mutual friends on the platform. A few people from Mark's old consulting firm. And then I saw a photo from a group Christmas party 2 years ago. She was in the background, laughing with a group of people. And it hit me. I remembered her. She had been a junior analyst at a company Mark's team had been consulting for. I had met her, shaken her hand. We had a brief, forgettable conversation about the terrible holiday traffic. She wasn't a stranger. She was a person who had been in my home, had smiled at my face, all while she was... What? Sleeping with my husband? Planning it? I clicked back to her main profile page and stared at her smiling face. Chloe Vance. The name echoed in the silent room. The betrayal was no longer a phantom. It had a name. It had a face. It had a history. And it was smiling at me from the screen of my phone, basking in the light of the life it had stolen. Chloe Vance. I whispered her name into the silent room, and the sound of it was like poison on my tongue. I remembered her now, with a clarity that was physically painful. It was at our company Christmas party 2 years ago, a sprawling event Mark's firm hosted at a downtown hotel. She wasn't his colleague, but an analyst from a client's team. She'd been standing near the bar with a group of other junior employees, laughing at something one of them said. I remembered Mark introducing us briefly. She had shaken my hand. Her grip was firm, her nails perfectly manicured. She had smiled at me, a polite, professional smile, and said something like, "It's so nice to finally meet you. Mark talks about you all the time." At the time, I had registered it as a sweet, if slightly generic, compliment. Now, the memory of her words curdled in my stomach. What had he been telling her about me? Had this started then? Was she sizing me up even as she smiled in my face? Every second of that brief, meaningless interaction was now replaying in my mind, colored with a sinister new meaning. I had invited a viper into the periphery of my life, and I hadn't even realized she was there, waiting. The shock of her identity was a sharp, personal stab. But it was the caption on Jessica's photo that began to peel back the layers of a much larger, more rotten conspiracy. Couldn't ask for a better start to our guys' weekend getaway. Winking face, the winking emoji seemed to mock me from the screen. A guy's weekend. But Jessica was there. This wasn't a guy's trip at all. This was something else, disguised. My investigative focus, which had been lasered in on the face of my husband's mistress, now pulled back, like a camera zooming out to reveal a much wider, more horrifying scene. Dave and Jessica were there. Mark was there with Chloe. This was, at the very least, a double date. But Mark was a man who believed in security, in redundancies. An elaborate lie like this felt bigger than just 4 people. There had to be more. The whole guy's weekend premise was the cover story, the alibi they could all use. My mind started frantically flipping through the Rolodex of our social circle. Who else was in their inner sanctum? Who were Mark and Dave's closest friends? The name that came to mind immediately was Rob. Rob and his wife, Megan. The 6 of us were a regular feature in each other's lives. We went to football games, hosted barbecues, went on a disastrous camping trip once. Megan and I weren't best friends, but we were friendly. We followed each other on social media. We commented on each other's posts. With a sense of grim determination, I typed Megan's name into the Instagram search bar. Her profile, like Chloe's, was public. Her most recent post was from 3 days ago, a picture of her dog. But her Instagram story was active. There was a little, pulsating rainbow circle around her profile picture. My finger hovered over it, a knot of dread tightening in my gut. I knew I was about to find something that would hurt me, but the need to know was a compulsion, an addiction. I tapped the circle. The first clip was a boomerang of 4 cocktail glasses clinking together. 2 were holding whiskey on the rocks, 1 was a margarita, 1 was a glass of white wine. In the background, out of focus, was the unmistakable blue expanse of a lake at sunset. My eyes darted around the frame, looking for clues. The hands. 2 were clearly male, larger, with more visible veins. One of them wore a leather-strapped watch that I recognized as Dave's. 2 hands were female, with painted nails. I swiped to the next story. It was a short video, panning across a beautiful, modern living room with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the water. For a split second, the camera panned past a reflection in the glass. It was Megan, filming on her phone. But it was the audio that made my blood run cold. Laughter. A group of people laughing at a joke someone had just told. And amidst the chatter, I heard it, clear as day. Mark's laugh. It was a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. A deep, rumbling laugh that started in his chest. A laugh that had echoed through our home for 12 years. A laugh I had always associated with joy, with comfort, with us. Hearing it now, in this context, felt like a desecration. He was there. He was happy. He was laughing in a lake house in Texas with his mistress and our friends. While I was sitting in our silent office, my world falling apart. The final piece of the puzzle slid into its sickening place. This wasn't a solo affair. It wasn't even a double date. This was a couple's vacation. A secret, adulterous getaway for a group of our closest friends. Mark and Chloe. Dave and Jessica. Rob and Megan. The men had sold the trip to their wives, or in Mark's case, to me, as a guy's weekend. A harmless, all-male retreat. But it was a lie, a coordinated alibi to allow them to bring their partners. Except Mark's legitimate partner, his wife, was the one person left out of the equation. The sheer scale of the betrayal was breathtaking. It was a cancer that had metastasized throughout our entire social life. These were the people we had built our life around. Jessica, who had brought me soup when I had the flu. Rob, who had helped Mark assemble our backyard patio furniture. Megan, who I had spent an entire afternoon with, helping her choose paint colors for her baby's nursery. They had all looked me in the eye. They had all smiled at me, hugged me, asked about my day, all while knowing this. They were all in on the joke. And I was the punchline. I felt a profound, soul-crushing isolation. It was as if I had woken up from a long dream to find that I was the only person who hadn't known it was a dream. My marriage wasn't the only thing that was a lie. My friendships were a lie. My community was a lie. The entire foundation of my adult life was a carefully constructed stage. And I was the only actor who hadn't been given the script. I wasn't just losing my husband. I was losing everyone. I was completely, utterly, and devastatingly alone. For a few hours, I was paralyzed. I sat in my office chair, surrounded by the digital wreckage of my life, and I did nothing. The sheer number of people involved, the depth of the conspiracy, it was too vast to comprehend. It felt like I was a single, tiny boat caught in a hurricane that had been conjured by everyone I trusted. To fight, it would be pointless. The waves were too high, the wind too strong. The easiest thing to do would be to let it capsize me, to sink into the black, silent water of grief and disappear. I could cry. I could break things. I could call my mother or my sister and sob hysterically into the phone. That's what a normal person, a victim, would do. But as the initial shockwave of the social betrayal receded, it left something hard and cold in its place. The overwhelming pain didn't break me. It forged me into something new. The grief, so vast and bottomless, began to crystallize. The messy, hot agony cooled and compressed into a diamond of pure, cold rage. Tears were a luxury I couldn't afford. A hysterical phone call would be a release of the very pressure I now needed to build. They had all counted on me being the victim. They had counted on my tears, my confusion, my emotional collapse. That collapse would give Mark the opening he needed to manage the situation, to gaslight me, to twist the narrative until I was the one who was crazy and paranoid. I would not give him that satisfaction. A decision was made not in my head, but in the marrow of my bones. I would not be the weeping wife waiting by the door. I would be the architect of his reckoning. He and his friends had written a play, and they had cast me as the tragic, ignorant fool. It was time for me to write a new final act. One where I was the only person in control. My office, a room once filled with colorful design swatches and creative sketches, transformed into a war room. The mission was simple. Assemble a case so airtight, so irrefutable, that when he walked through the door on Sunday night, his lies would have no oxygen to breathe. I was no longer a wife. I was a prosecutor building a case for a trial he didn't even know was coming. I started with the social media evidence. My movements were precise, my mind unervingly clear. I went back to Chloe Vance's Instagram profile. I took a screenshot of her main page, her smiling face a permanent fixture in my gallery of pain. I screenshotted the photo of her on the hotel balcony, zooming in on the reflection in the glass door, the ghostly image of my husband and his anniversary watch. I went to Jessica's profile, screenshot, the photo of her and the women at the Oasis. I paid special attention to her caption, the poisonously cheerful lie about a guy's weekend. I screenshotted the list of people tagged in the photo, a digital roster of the conspiracy. Then I went to Megan's profile. I used a screen recording app on my phone to capture her Instagram story, making sure the audio of Mark's laugh was crisp and clear. I saved the video file to my desktop. Next, the finances. I logged back into the credit card account. I went through the list of recent transactions and, one by one, I saved a PDF of each individual receipt that was available. Then, I printed the entire statement for the last 30 days. I took a red highlighter from my desk drawer, its color like dried blood, and I began to mark the evidence. The $2,100 charge for the VRBO on Lake Travis. The $487 grocery bill from Austin. The $312 dinner at the Oasis. The $28 coffee that started it all. The paper was a sea of damning red ink, a financial map of his betrayal. But just having the evidence wasn't enough. It had to be presented with chilling, undeniable logic. I opened a new document on my computer. I typed a simple title at the top, Denver Summit Itinerary. I began to build a timeline, a meticulous, cross-referenced log of his lies versus the truth. On the left side of the page, I listed his narrative. On the right, I listed the reality, complete with time-stamped evidence. Tuesday, 8:15 p.m. Mark announces mandatory leadership summit in Denver, Thursday through Sunday. Wednesday, 9:30 p.m. Mark packs for a corporate trip to a cold weather city, including a brand new bottle of SPF 50 sunscreen. Thursday, 9:17 a.m. Mark texts, landed safely in Denver. Thursday, 7:52 a.m. Central Time credit card charge. Joe's Coffee, Austin, Texas. Screenshot 1. Thursday, 4:45 p.m. Central Time credit card charge. HEB Grocery, Austin, Texas. Receipt 1. Thursday, 7:30 p.m. Central Time Instagram post from Jessica Miller. Geotagged at the Oasis on Lake Travis, with caption referencing Guy's Weekend. Chloe Vance is tagged in the photo. Screenshot 2, 3. Thursday, 9:12 p.m. Central Time credit card charge. The Oasis on Lake Travis. Receipt 2. I continued like this for hours. I didn't stop to eat. I didn't notice the sun arcing across the sky and beginning to set. My entire world had shrunk to this single task. There was a strange power in it. Every screenshot I took, every line I typed, was a piece of my stolen agency being reclaimed. He had created a chaotic, secret world of lies. I was dragging it, kicking and screaming, into the stark, orderly light of truth. The pain was still there, a constant, crushing weight on my chest, but this work was a container for it. It turned the wild, destructive energy of my grief into the focused, disciplined energy of a master strategist. By the time I was done, a neat pile of printed documents sat on my desk next to my laptop. The computer screen showed the completed timeline, a 2-page document of pure, unassailable fact. I had my case. Now I just needed to prepare the courtroom. I imagined him walking through the front door on Sunday night, exhausted from his trip, a souvenir for me in his bag, and a web of lies on his lips. He would expect a hug. He would expect a quiet evening on the couch. He would expect the loving, trusting wife he had left behind on Thursday morning. He had no idea she was gone forever, and in her place was a woman who was waiting patiently, with a file full of evidence and a heart full of ice. Once the file of evidence was compiled, a strange and unsettling calm descended upon me. The frantic energy of the investigation was gone, replaced by the quiet, patient resolve of a predator waiting in a blind. My house was no longer a home. It was a stage, and I was the director, the stage manager, and the lead actor all in one. All that was left to do was wait for the other lead to arrive for his final, unrehearsed performance. The next 2 days were some of the longest of my life. I existed in a state of suspended animation, moving through the shell of my routine with the detached precision of a robot. I watered the plants, their vibrant green leaves a stark contrast to the gray landscape of my new reality. I tidied the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already clean, the familiar motions a flimsy barrier against the chaos raging within me. The world had split into 2 distinct realms. There was the house, my war room, the place where the truth lived in a neat manila folder on my desk. And then there was everything else, a distant, muffled world that I no longer felt a part of. The true test of my resolve came in the form of my phone. It was a live wire connecting my cold, silent world of truth to his warm, vibrant world of lies. He was a dutiful texter, a habit I had once found endearing. Now, every buzz and ping from my phone was a small, painful detonation. Friday afternoon, a text arrived. Finally done with breakout sessions. My brain is fried. They're taking us out for some team-building thing tonight. Probably something lame like bowling. God, I miss you. I read the words, and a bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips. Team building. He was probably on a boat on Lake Travis at that very moment, a cold beer in one hand, his other arm likely draped around Chloe's shoulders. I set the phone down, took 3 deep breaths, and composed my reply, each word a carefully chosen lie. Poor baby. Try to have a little fun anyway. I miss you more. The house is too quiet without you. Red heart, the heart emoji felt like a drop of poison. The performance was exhausting. On Saturday evening, he called. Seeing his face pop up on my screen, a smiling selfie of us from a vacation last year, sent a jolt of pure loathing through me. I let it ring 3 times, smoothed the expression on my face into one of pleasant neutrality, and answered. Hey, you, I said, my voice a perfect imitation of my normal, happy to hear from him tone. Hey, honey. His voice was warm, familiar, and utterly fake. Sorry I didn't call sooner. It's been absolutely non-stop. Don't be silly. I figured you were swamped, I said, picking a piece of lint off my yoga pants. I was sitting at my desk, staring directly at the printed photo of him in the reflection of Chloe's balcony door. How are things in Denver? The ease with which he lied was the most chilling part. He was a natural. He spun a whole narrative, complete with boring anecdotes about a socially awkward VP from the Omaha office and a detailed critique of the rubbery chicken served at their awards luncheon. He was borrowing details, I realized, probably from other real business trips, and weaving them into this fictional masterpiece. He asked me about my weekend, and I told him I'd mostly been relaxing, reading a book, and that I'd ordered pizza for dinner. Every word out of my mouth felt like a betrayal of the woman he had turned me into. The woman who was sitting in front of a folder that could obliterate his entire world. Well, it all sounds incredibly boring, and I'm glad you're almost done, I said, injecting a note of sympathy into my voice. I can't wait for you to be home. Me too, babe. Me too, he said, his voice dropping into that intimate register he always used with me. Just one more day. I'll see you tomorrow night. I love you. I love you too, I whispered, and the lie tasted like ash in my mouth. I hung up the phone and sat in the silence, my own heartbeat a frantic drum in my ears. The man I had just spoken to, the man whose voice could once calm any storm within me, was a stranger, phantom, and the real Mark was laughing and drinking and sleeping next to another woman, without a single thought for the life he was systematically destroying. On Sunday, I began to prepare the stage. I moved the manila folder from my office to the living room, placing it on the coffee table and covering it with a copy of a home design magazine. It was a landmine hidden in plain sight. I cleaned the house, not with the loving care of a homeowner, but with the cold efficiency of a crime scene cleaner. I was erasing the last traces of the life we had before, preparing a sterile environment for the confrontation to come. I even thought about what I would wear, settling on a simple gray sweater and jeans. I would not look like a woman scorned. I would not look emotional or dramatic. I would look like a calm, rational person about to have a very serious conversation. I would give him nothing to use against me. At 7:15 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was him, just landed, grabbing my bag and then getting a car. Should be home in about an hour, depending on traffic. This was it. The countdown had begun. A surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded my system. I walked to the living room and sat down on the couch, the same couch where he had first told me about the trip. I picked up a book and opened it to a random page, resting it in my lap as a prop. I focused on my breathing, inhaling for 4 counts, holding for 4, exhaling for 4. The house was preternaturally quiet, holding its breath. The storm was just over the horizon, and the air was thick with a heavy, electric stillness. An hour later, almost to the minute, I heard the familiar sound of a car door shutting in our driveway. My heart leaped into my throat, a wild, panicked bird trapped in the cage of my ribs. I forced it down. I smoothed my sweater. A few seconds later, the sound I had been waiting for all weekend finally came. The jingle of keys, and then the distinct, metallic click of the key sliding into the lock of our front door. The trap was set. The performance was about to begin. The sound of the lock turning was the starting pistol for the final act. I took one last, steadying breath, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. The door swung open, and there he was, Mark, my husband. He looked exactly as I expected him to, travel-worn, a little weary around the eyes, but with a practiced, relieved smile plastered on his face. He was home. He was safe. He dropped his roller suitcase and his laptop bag by the door with a tired thud. "Honey, I'm home," he called out, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet house. He saw me on the couch and his smile widened. "There you are." He opened his arms, expecting me to run into them. My body moved on autopilot. I stood up, closed the book I hadn't been reading, and walked toward him. I let him wrap his arms around me, and for a split second, I was suffocated by the familiar scent of his cologne, a scent that had meant safety and love for 12 years. Now it smelled like deceit. I endured the hug for precisely 3 seconds before gently pulling away. My body felt stiff, unyielding. "Hey," I said, my voice a flat, neutral thing. "You must be exhausted." He seemed to notice the coolness, the lack of an enthusiastic welcome. A flicker of something, confusion, annoyance, crossed his face before he masked it. "You have no idea. Longest weekend of my life. I'm so glad to be back." He tried to lean in for a real kiss, but I turned my head slightly, offering my cheek. He paused, then planted a quick, dry kiss there. "Everything okay? You seem quiet." "Just a long weekend," I said, echoing his words. It wasn't a lie. I walked back toward the living room. "Come on, sit down. Tell me everything. I want to hear all about this big, important summit." It was the invitation he was waiting for, the cue to begin his performance. He followed me to the couch, sinking into the cushions with a weary sigh as I sat opposite him in the armchair. He launched into his story, and I watched him, my expression a carefully constructed mask of gentle curiosity. I was a scientist observing a specimen, marveling at the intricate, complex patterns of its dishonesty. "Oh my God, it was a total death march," he began, rubbing his eyes. "The hotel was fine, I guess, but the conference rooms were freezing. And the keynote speaker on Friday morning, the so-called guru of global finance, was so boring I think I saw a guy in the front row actually fall asleep. I'm not even kidding," he continued, spinning his web with the confidence of a master weaver. He talked about the bland, overpriced food. He invented a funny, self-deprecating story about fumbling a conversation with a senior executive from London. He complained about the mandatory team-building exercise on Friday night, which he claimed was, in fact, bowling, and that his boss, a man named Arthur, was embarrassingly competitive. Every word was a lie. A smooth, polished, well-rehearsed lie. I let him talk, nodding occasionally, my silence the canvas on which he painted his masterpiece of deceit. He talked for nearly 10 minutes, emptying his arsenal of fabrications, completely unaware that he was simply providing me with more ammunition. He finished with a final, dramatic sigh. "Anyway, I'm just so happy to be home, to be with you." He looked at me, his eyes full of what I once would have sworn was genuine affection, expecting me to offer sympathy, to coo over his difficult weekend. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. He shifted uncomfortably. "So," he said, his smile faltering slightly, "how was your weekend?" I looked at him, my expression unchaining. The mask of the loving wife fell away, replaced by something he had never seen before. A look of cold, dispassionate appraisal. "You're a very good liar, Mark," I said, my voice quiet, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion. "It's impressive, really. The level of detail is masterful." His face froze. The blood drained from his cheeks. What are you talking about?" He tried to laugh it off, a strained, nervous sound. "Sarah, are you okay? You're acting weird." "Am I?" I asked, my voice still level. I leaned forward, my movements slow and deliberate. I picked up the magazine from the coffee table and set it aside, revealing the manila folder beneath. His eyes locked onto it, a flicker of pure panic igniting in their depths. "I've been doing some research while you were away," I said. I opened the folder, my hands perfectly steady. "Let's start with your itinerary." I slid the first printed document across the coffee table toward him. It was the receipt from Joe's Coffee. "This is from Thursday morning in Austin, Texas. That's a long way from your Denver hotel. You must have been dying for a decent cup of coffee." He stared at the paper, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish. It must be credit card fraud," he stammered, grabbing onto the first plausible excuse he could find. "Someone must have stolen my number. I have to call the company." "Fraud?" I repeated, my voice flat. "An excellent theory. I suppose the fraudster then decided to go grocery shopping for a party." I slid the next receipt across, the $487 bill from H-E-B. "And then they went out for a lovely sunset dinner on Lake Travis?" The receipt from the Oasis followed. "They were very busy, these fraudsters." His face was ashen. The bluster was gone, replaced by a dawning, sickening horror. He was trapped. He knew it. "But this fraud was personal, Mark," I continued, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "Because they also rented a house in your name. A very expensive house, right on the lake." The VRBO receipt for $2,100 was the next to join the pile. He flinched as if the paper had physically struck him. "And the strangest part," I said, picking up my laptop from the floor beside my chair and placing it on the coffee table, "is that our friends were apparently there with the fraudsters too." I turned the laptop to face him, the screen showing Jessica's Instagram post. He stared at her smiling face, at the damning caption about a guy's weekend. "And you know who else was there?" I clicked to the next image. Chloe Vance's smiling face filled the screen. "I remember her from the Christmas party. She seemed so nice." He finally broke. "Sarah, please," he whispered, his voice cracking, his eyes wide with desperation. It was the pathetic plea of a man whose world was collapsing around him. But I wasn't finished. Please what, Mark? Please stop showing you the truth. I reached for my phone. There's just one more thing. I want you to listen. I pressed play on the screen-recorded video from Megan's Instagram story. The room filled with the sounds of clinking glasses, light chatter, and then, clear as day, his own deep, carefree laugh. The sound of his own happiness, recorded at the scene of his greatest betrayal, was the final blow. He physically slumped, folding in on himself as if his spine had dissolved. He dropped his head into his hands, his whole body trembling. The lies were all dead. There was nowhere left for him to run, nowhere left to hide. The coffee table between us was a graveyard of his deceit, and he just sat there, broken, amidst the ruins. The storm had finally hit, and it was even more devastating than I had imagined. And in its wake, there was nothing but a cold, vast, and deafening silence. The silence in the room was a living thing. It was thick and heavy, punctuated only by the ragged sound of Mark's breathing as he stared at the tabletop exhibition of his lies. The adrenaline that had kept me sharp and focused for 3 days began to recede, leaving a hollow, buzzing exhaustion in its wake. The victor in a war is still left standing on a battlefield, and all I could see was wreckage. His, mine, ours. It was all just rubble now. I was the one who had to speak, to break the spell of his silent, self-pitying collapse. "Get your things," I said. My voice was raspy, a stranger's voice in my own home. His head snapped up. His face was a mess of disbelief and desperation. Tears were streaming down his cheeks, a sight I hadn't seen since his father's funeral. But this time, the sight didn't move me. It was the pathetic, predictable performance of a man who had been caught. "Sarah, no. Please," he begged, his voice a pathetic croak. "We can fix this. It was a mistake. A stupid, meaningless mistake." "A mistake," I repeated, the words tasting like poison. "A mistake is when you forget to pick up milk from the store, Mark. A mistake is not a meticulously planned, multi-state, multi-couple conspiracy to betray your wife of 12 years. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. A series of thousands of choices." "But it didn't mean anything," he insisted, his voice rising with a desperate edge. "I swear, it was just fun. It's you I love. It has always only been you. Please don't throw away 12 years over this." I almost laughed. The audacity of him, to stand there amidst the ashes of the life he had burned down and ask me not to play with matches. "You threw away 12 years, Mark. You did it when you lied about a business trip. You did it when you bought a plane ticket to Austin. You did it when you booked a lake house for another woman. You did it every time you texted me a lie while you were there, laughing with our friends. The 12 years you're talking about are gone. You destroyed them. This," I said, gesturing to the papers on the table, "is all that's left." I stood up, the movement feeling heavy, like I was moving through water. "I want you to pack a bag, and then I want you to leave." The finality in my voice must have finally broken through his wall of denial. The pleading stopped. A look of stark, bleak understanding settled on his face. He stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to find the woman he married in the eyes of the cold stranger standing before him. He found nothing. He pushed himself up from the couch, his movements slow and defeated, like an old man. Without another word, he turned and walked up the stairs. I didn't follow him. I stayed in the living room, my silent vigil. I could hear the sounds of his movements from the floor above. The soft slide of a dresser drawer opening. The click of suitcase latches. The sounds of him packing to leave the life we had built together. Each sound was a small, sharp stab to my heart. This was real. This was happening. There was no going back. This wasn't a fight we would recover from. This was an ending. 10 minutes later, he came back down the stairs, carrying the same roller suitcase he had brought home, now packed with a different future. He didn't look at me as he walked to the front door. He just stood there, his back to me, his hand on the doorknob. "Where am I supposed to go?" he asked, his voice small and hollow. "I don't know, Mark," I said. and I was shocked by the genuine indifference in my voice. Maybe Dave has a spare room, or Rob, or you could call Chloe. You seem to have a lot of friends. I'm sure one of them will be happy to help you. It's not my problem to solve anymore. He flinched, then nodded slowly. He opened the door, and the cool night air washed into the hallway. He hesitated on the threshold for a moment, then stepped out into the darkness without looking back. I watched him walk down the path to the driveway, a lonely silhouette under the porch light. Then I closed the door, and for the first time in 12 years, I turned the deadbolt against my husband. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for my entire life. The battle was over. I had won. The truth had prevailed. But there was no triumph, no relief. There was only the profound, crushing weight of the silence he had left behind. Slowly, I walked back to the living room. The evidence was still spread across the coffee table like the remnants of a terrible party. His empty whiskey glass sat on a coaster, a faint ring of condensation, a ghostly reminder of his presence. The house felt huge, cavernous, and impossibly empty. The adrenaline was gone, and in its place, a tide of pure, uncut grief began to rise. I sank onto the couch, the silence of the empty house pressing in on me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I finally allowed myself to cry. The tears weren't loud or hysterical. They were quiet, exhausted tears for the man I thought I had married, for the life I thought I had, and for the terrifying, unknown emptiness of the new one that was just beginning.